brief. She joined the Goshen College Communication Department and is now faculty advisor to the Record, a newspaper that when she was a student, she edited. She's a journalism graduate of Goshen College and also has a master's in public administration from Arizona State University. She brings 15 years of magazine editor experience. She was with the Mennonite, now Anabaptist World. She was executive director of Dove's Nest, now Safe Church, and continues related work at Goshen College with Prevention Intervention Network. She is married to Brian Miller, a medical doctor who has now left the Navajo. Navajo? Yeah. Do I have the right tribe?
It's two different, Apache and the Tohono.
Okay. The Tohono and the Apache Indians, he was serving in Arizona, and now he is with the Goshen Physicians of Goshen Health. And he happens to be the family doctor of at least one member of the Sojourner Sunday School class that I'm aware of, maybe more. Yeah, there's more than So we doubly benefit from their coming to our community. So please welcome Anna. She's changed the topic a bit from what was advertised in the bulletin because she thinks the capacity to be able to converse together about what we face, how we respond. I know of one city in the great state of Indiana with 2 Mennonite congregations. And one Mennonite congregation, after the election, had a triumphal celebration. The other one had a time of lament and sorrow. So here you have it within the congregational life of us Mennonites. And I'm hoping that, Anna, you give us a little guidance as to how we should be conversing and thinking and praying and responding to what we face today. Thank you, Anna, for coming.
Thank you for having me for that wonderful introduction. And explaining how my topic has shifted just a bit from when I was going to speak before the election and then where we're at now and some things that I want to share from my work at the college and work before that as well. I was inspired by Nicholas Kristof's piece in the New York Times, I think the day after the election. It always impresses me when writers are able to quickly put together thoughts within 24 hours of a major national and global shift. He entitled it "My Manifesto for Despairing Democrats." And he has this list of 12 things that he has committed to doing. He's a longtime columnist for the New York Times. Some of you may be familiar with him. I encourage you to read this piece. He gives more details to each of his commitments. I will read a couple here. He says, I will back organizations fighting to uphold human values. I will subscribe to a news organization. Always a good chance to plug that. I will keep my cool. I will care for my mental health. I will be alert to gender nastiness. I will temper my strong views with humility. I love listicles. A listicle is an article that's essentially a list. It's not that deep. It's very simple, but it's really accessible for readers. And so when I was with the Mennonite, now Anabaptist World, I really enjoyed putting together articles that were formatted this way, either news or feature or opinion pieces like this one. I encouraged the 2 editors of the Record, I had them read this, or I sent it to them, and I said, you might want to think about formatting an editorial like this. Well, they didn't listen to me, and that's okay. But I created my own manifesto that's much shorter than this, and I want to share it with you. And at the end, I'm going to have you think about what you might include if you were to write something like this. So we have a manifesto for despairing Christians. Here's mine. Manifesto for despairing Christian Mennonite professors. Here are my 4. I will practice active bystanding. I will teach to build connections. I will encourage others to use their voices, and I will volunteer in my community. These first 2 are kind of mini lessons that I will go into. The second 2 are much shorter, but I still have some concrete examples I will share with you. Will these things be easy, and will I do them every day perfectly? No. But in sharing them with you, I am committing to this work, at least to some degree. I'm glad that Vic's introduction included some of the new ways that I'm working with student groups this year. So I'm in my 4th year at Goshen College. I love teaching classes. I like my colleagues so much. I learn from them. What's new this year is how I've leaned into working with students outside of the classroom. I serve as faculty advisor for the Record, something that Dwayne Stolzfus did for 24 years. So I'm the newbie, and it's been a wonderful semester. I also work with the C. Henry Smith Peace Oratorical Contest. I direct that speech contest, and I know many of you have come to those in the past. I'll use that in one of my examples later. In addition, I've joined a team of faculty leaders with the Prevention and Intervention Network, otherwise known as PIN. So there's 3 of us, faculty and staff, that work with a very committed group of students who lead trainings with first years and other kind of educational and fun awareness building events on campus to reduce personal violence, abuse, and harm. So where we're at now, post-election, we need to continue to be alert and observant to those around us and how they're being treated in all kinds of contexts and situations. That's always been true. It continues to be true. So what do I mean by active bystanding? I love the way our new curriculum is not just preaching to the choir, or when I was a student at Goshen College, there was a women's group, a women's association doing this kind of work, and it was done very well. But the messaging was often just sort of towards one another. PIN students are student athletes, BIPOC students, Latino students, commuter students, students who live on campus, men and women. It's a wide variety of students who are committed to this work, and they partner with other student groups. So active bystanding is as simple as intervening on someone else's behalf to improve a situation. This last, the purple box, has some examples of how we do this all the time. Let's say we finish a meal and somebody has a big chunk of spinach in their teeth. Do you tell them? How do you tell them? When do you tell them? You want to help that person out. You also don't want to embarrass them, but you're probably going to do something. We can always do something. And so what these students are committed to is not talking to other groups, other students, like assuming they're going to be a victim or an offender of something horrible. No, that may happen, but we're starting at the place where we care for each other, and we are all responsible for making our communities, especially the Goshen College community, even safer and even better. My favorite tool in the PIN curriculum is called the 5 Ds. So we use a lot of scenarios for these students, and I'll make the scenario very simple to help us understand how we would use these 5 Ds. The last one is direct. That's direct confrontation. That's like the Superman or woman coming in and saying, stop. Stop doing what you're doing. I need to keep you safe. And so often that's what we think intervention means. And that's all we think it means. And we think, I'm not comfortable with that. So what should I do? Well, turns out you can always do something. So the students give the 5D lesson to the first years when they come in. And here's a scenario they might use is that you're at a party or a social event and you see one person talking to another person and they're making that person uncomfortable. They might be kind of in their space too much, maybe touching them, just not respecting their boundaries. So what can you do? Well, the one thing you might be able to do with the first D would be to distract. Distract is disrupting the situation without drawing attention. So you might just go over to those two people and say, hey, so what are you all doing tomorrow? You might change the subject. You might make a joke. You're going to distract somehow. Number 2, second D, delegate. Maybe you're watching this interaction happen and you're not sure if the one person is actually uncomfortable or not. You can't really tell. So you might turn to the person next to you and say, hey, what do you think we should do about that situation? Okay, so then you're involving a third party. You're delegating. You're getting advice from somebody else. And maybe they will be the one to take action. So what students tell one another is if you're really shy, or maybe you feel like there's a power imbalance, you're younger, you are newer to campus, maybe there's a racial or gender identity piece that makes you feel like you have less power. You can delegate. You can ask someone else to help you intervene or to do something. Then there's delay. This is when you don't actually do anything in the moment, but you follow up. Because intervention can happen before, during, or after some sort of incident or situation. Maybe you can't actually intervene in the moment. I, for example, often have my school-age children with me. So I'm taking care of them. I'm responsible for them. And it's hard to know what I can really do. Whether I see someone who needs help out on the road or on campus, right? But I can follow up later. I can delay. I'll give you a small concrete example of this. I was with a group of people, a group of students. One student talked about how she was working with someone on a project who was making her feel uncomfortable, some comments that he was making. And she said, well, I switched projects. I'm working on something else now. So it seemed somewhat resolved. Well, later I thought that was kind of an interesting disclosure that she mentioned that. And nobody said anything, including myself. So I used delay. And the next day, I talked with her and I said, I just want to follow up on that. Is there anything else you want to talk about or do? I'm here for you. She said, no, I'm okay. Thank you for bringing that up. I feel okay about it, ready to move on. Okay, good. But I gave her that space to say more. Delay is a good one. Document is the fourth one. That's where you take note of the situation. This one doesn't work as well in my party example. But there's so much digital communication that students are doing on their phones, on the computer. And so if they are receiving messages from someone, there's a pattern of uncomfortable messages, they can document that. They should keep track of that so that if they do want to make a report or they want to follow up, that they have that documentation. So it can be done by the person who's receiving those messages or a friend who encourages someone else, hey, don't delete that email. Don't delete that text. Maybe keep it or write it down so that you have that documentation. And finally, direct confrontation. Okay, so there are times, maybe it's who we are as people or the situation is just right. And we can step in and say, no, you can't treat the person that way. That is a racist or a sexist comment. We can't say that. Or I'm going to even kind of put my body in between this and help these two people. So that's also an option. That's a great option, but it's not the only one. So these 5Ds, I think about them almost once a week. They come into my head. I think what a great tool for students to have, especially now. It's always been important, but it's going to continue to be important when we hear others speaking in our community about marginalized groups or treating other people in ways that are not respectful. We can use the 5Ds in those situations as well. But the empowering piece is that we can always do something. I was just out with some friends of mine, a group of women, similar life stage and age of mine, and they were talking about what to do when you observe maybe a couple fighting in public or something where you really feel like you don't know the people, but you need to do something. And I was able to share, one of them had an example of this. And I was able to share the 5Ds. And later I texted them this image and they thought, wow, that is so cool to know that I don't have to do number 5, direct confrontation, that there's other things I can do to intervene. So it's a helpful tool for people of all ages and stages. That is my first commitment, to continue to practice active bystanding. I'm waiting for my slide here. Well, this is an okay one to have it land on. Okay, it might appear on its own. My next commitment is teaching to build connections. So I teach this really fun class called Communication Research, and we read Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers. Has anyone read this book or anything by Malcolm Gladwell? Very good. Do you remember the honor culture chapter? Okay. Has anyone heard of honor culture? Okay. I led a very fun and interesting class activity and discussion on honor culture just days after the election. And I was so pleased with how it went. And I attribute much of it to Malcolm's content, but also a new way of reframing what we may also call toxic masculinity or machismo. Honor culture is an accessible and non-judgmental way of understanding why some people, mostly men, respond to conflict the way that they do. Honor culture, if you don't know what it is, it's basically the willingness to fight somebody if your reputation is at stake, or your family or your friends. If anyone insults you and your people, you're going to fight back, and that is the right way to respond. So in the Malcolm Gladwell, in his chapter, there's honor culture all over the world, every continent, many cultures and communities. He focuses on honor culture in the US and the difference between Northerners and Southerners. So he focused on this experiment. This was going to be my next slide, done in 1996 at the University of Michigan, where some researchers took 80 white male Southerners from Southern states that they defined in the study, and then about 80 white male Northerners. And they had a hallway set up with what we learn in class. Someone who's a part of the experiment as an actor is called the Confederate. And so the Confederate came down the hallway and bumped into the participants in the experiment one at a time without them knowing. And in some of the situations, called them a bad word. And what they found was that the Southern students, in the control situation where the bump and the insult didn't happen, the Southern students were very polite and would back up out of the way, and get out of the way of the other person. And the Northerner students just kind of walked on through. But when the bump and the insult happened from the actor in the experiment, the Southern students got very upset and would almost kind of jostle them back or insult them back. Where the Northern students, hey, what's your problem, man? Just kind of walked on by. So the researchers thought, well, what's going on with this? There was data at that time, and I imagine it might also still be true, that there's more fatal crime that happens in the South. So unfortunately, there's crime everywhere, but in the South, it tends to be more deadly. And so the researchers wondered, well, why is that happening? Is it the heat? Sure. Is it history of slavery? Sure. Poverty? Yeah. Is it also honor culture? Yes. They argue that honor culture is part of that. So Malcolm Gladwell goes on to make the point that this is generations of cultural legacy that is passed down. So you go back 300, 400 years to where the Scotch Irish came from, Northern Ireland, Northern England, Scotland. These families were herdsmen versus farmers. And you could not have people messing with your livestock. That was your livelihood. And so you had to be tough. I'll read a quote here. The herdsman, the Scotch Irish herdsman background, he has to be aggressive. He has to make it clear through his words and deeds that he is not weak. Culture of honor is a world where a man's reputation is the center of his livelihood and self-worth. And so that honor culture might still exist today. We might see it in the South more. It exists everywhere to various degrees. But it's intense, and it's been passed down from fathers to sons and from families to families, and it might explain some of our behavior, okay? So I used ChatGPT to help me write a skit so that we could act out that experiment. And they had a lot of fun with that because they got to bump into each other in this hallway that we made. And then I had them get into groups and talk about, do they think they come from families, from honor culture families or not? Actually, that wasn't my prompt. I wanted them to talk through the experiment, what the findings were, what Malcolm Gladwell says about it. Malcolm Gladwell just basically makes the argument that cultural legacy has a huge impact on each of us. And these things don't just happen, but they're rooted in history and generational values being passed on. So they responded to those prompts, but really they talked about their own families and their own situation. And some of them were critiquing honor culture, but being very respectful to other students who were saying, oh yeah, this is how my family is. You insult us, like we're going to fight back. Now, most of the Mennonite students in that class were like, no, this is not my culture. But many other students resonated with this. And it was just a way to approach how we treat each other in a way that explains it more broadly, isn't as judgmental, doesn't make people feel bad about who they are. I was just very pleased with how it went and thinking about ways of reframing things a little more neutrally, a little more accessible and open. I also asked them if they thought this was stereotyping or if this was helpful. I asked them to think about if we had a lot of students from the South in our classroom, how would they feel? And then I shared with them that one of my friends is not from an honor culture family, but married someone who is. And how difficult that has been. So they have other cultural differences, but when she was able to identify, this is a root of a lot of our misunderstandings, it was like, boom, a light bulb went off. Because if you are from honor culture, protecting your reputation is huge. And we saw that in the election, and we still see it. And if you're not, you think, why are people overreacting? I don't get it. And then the other side's like, well, you're not loyal to your family and you're weak and you're not standing up for yourself. Okay, so it's this kind of back and forth where it's just hard to see where the other person is coming from. So in a small way, I was able to build a conversation into a classroom just a few days after the election that I hope maybe got students thinking a little bit more about where the others came from. And this is a large class, about 30 students. That's large at Goshen College. We're lucky. And I know that there were a variety of different ways that students voted or didn't vote in that classroom. I was not assuming that everyone wants to talk about honor culture and how that might explain Trump in a bad way, right? I had to find ways to get them together to talk. So those are my two mini lessons of content that I have found interesting and inspiring. I'm going to try again to get my slides here. Oh, yeah, here we go. We don't have a hallway like this, but I pretended to make one in newcomer. So the pattern, the finding was that Southerners responded more aggressively when insulted. And why, right? All right, I can use the record as my next one. So my next, my third commitment, I said the next two are a lot more simple. The first two were kind of mini lessons I wanted to share with you. In my role as faculty advisor for the record and working with the speech contest, I can now encourage students to share their voices even more, that continues to be really important these next 4 years and beyond. But I am also reminded by the need for specifics. Okay, so I had 2 students who applied for the speech contest, and they told me that their topic is dialogue and how to agree when we disagree. I can't wait. They're going to be great. But my role now as an advisor and mentor is to help them think, so what does that really mean? What does dialogue really mean? In my last example, it was giving students an entryway into understanding themselves and their families and those around them with a jumping off point. And it was an intentional classroom setting with discussion groups. But I want to know, where is this dialogue going to take place? How are we going to do it? What are the agreements going to be? Who's going to be involved? I'm reminded by the very first sermon I gave at Shalom Mennonite in Tucson, Arizona, and it was about storytelling and listening to others. And that's great. We all can get on board with that. However, an elder in the congregation came up to me afterwards, and this stays with me. And she said, I agree with you. We need more of that. But how do we actually do it? We talk about how we're going to talk with people that we don't agree with, but like, how do we find those people? How do we set it up? How do we make it fair? What do we get out of it? So now I can work with these students so that they can include stories and examples and specifics. I'm not sure what they're going to be, but I want to know where are the places on campus that students who disagree are talking, and how are they doing it in healthy ways? And maybe they'll have examples from their home life and their families and their communities. But I'm excited to draw that out because I gave a sermon that didn't have specifics and examples, and someone thoughtfully called me out on it. Or maybe I had a few, but there wasn't enough. And when I worked with the Mennonite magazine, Gordon Hauser, a wonderful mentor of mine, would often encourage me in my editorials or any kind of opinion writing to always give examples of what I'm talking about or what I'm writing about. And so I want to continue that with these students. And my last one, I'm almost finished here, is the continuing to volunteer in my community. So this one isn't quite as heavy and might seem a little bit like an easy out, but I will say that trick-or-treating on Halloween in that 8th Street, 7th Street area, I was looking at all these families who were voting different ways, coming from different places, and getting together for fun that evening. And then I thought about volunteering at my kids' swim meet, right next to parents that I imagine voted differently than I did. But we are excited about our kids swimming and about getting together in that way. That's the common shared goal. I joined the CAPS Elkhart board, which is the Child and Parent Services Board. I just joined. We had a wonderful orientation, and I can tell that that is a board where we may not all agree on social and political issues, but we know that supporting kids and families in Elkhart County is really important. And so I can't wait to enter into those kind of volunteer commitments. And I know you all have years of doing this. And so I am just committing to doing even more of that here in Goshen, Indiana, and in Elkhart County. So those are my 4 commitments. Since I don't have my slide up, I will read them one more time. Active bystanding, teaching to build broad connections between students who are coming from different places, encouraging others to use their voice and give examples, and leaning into even more community engagement and volunteering with people who I may disagree with. I believe that is all. I would love to hear items on your manifestos for despairing Christians.
Do we have this? Yes. Okay. Questions for Anna or comments?
We can despair how our states are sorting themselves into red and blue, and how MSNBC and Fox sort themselves into one or the other. And Goshen College might be at one end, and maybe Hillsdale, a different place. Is there ever an opportunity for colleges like these two to get together and debate ideas with a respectful format, no yelling and not interrupting and so forth? Is that kind of thing possible?
I don't know. You use the word debate, and that can be any number of things, but there is high school debate culture in this area, and I have been told by some people we should think about a debate club at Goshen College, and just that idea of learning to argue a side that you don't necessarily agree with, how much you can learn from that practice and how challenging it is for college students now, probably always has been, but probably more so for this generation, to really sort of maybe argue the side that they're assigned to that they don't agree with. I do think about the Peace Oratorical Contest as a place where people are respectfully listening to others, even if they don't agree with them. And it would be nice to have more debriefing and facilitation after that. But Goshen College and its other counterparts, that's a really fascinating idea. When we do that in athletics all the time with the Crossroads League and the colleges that we compete against in sports, and that's one area.
I'm not sure that this answers what the question is, but I want to give an example of experience. Our kids went to the public high school and participated in extracurricular activities, both their athletic activities, swimming, for instance, and summer swimming. And so we encountered the community people, and we became very, very friendly with people that I know had very different opinions on many issues than we did. but we've always been friends with them. And
Mhm.
it's continued through the years, and we consider them close.
Mhm. Yeah, this is not a, my number 4 is not a new thing. And I am encouraged to hear that.
Some of you may have read the article online that's coming up in Anabaptist World, in which two persons in Ohio, we know many, know both of them, or where they have family connections, and both of them are talking about why they voted for Trump. And I think it's going to generate a lot of response.
I can't wait. I have the privilege of getting together about once a month with Hannah Heinziker and Danny Klotz. The three of us get together for breakfast or lunch, and we all served similar roles with the Mennonite and Anabaptist World. And so we like to support Danny and whatever she's sorting through, but that'll be a good one.
And I read Anabaptist World quite carefully. And you have been, I think, an amazing as an editor of that magazine to push diverse ideas to our denomination. And I thought that the issue where you put pretty clearly a broader understanding of how God works in our world as far as religion is concerned. And now this last issue about the differences in political parties. And I think that it's amazing how well the paper is presenting ideas that maybe are not always compatible with the rest of the denomination, but it represents the diversity that we have in our own divided society. And I think that you're leading the way to help us talk about that together. And I really commend you for that.
Thank you. Well, I can't take credit for the current Anabaptist World, but I know it's a strong team. And Everett Thomas and Gordon Hauser and I worked really hard to try to include different voices years ago. So those things are happening. Easier said than done. So
Regarding the third D,
yes,
delay.
delay.
One of the things that I've learned over the years that if I delay more than a day or two, then I need to be in the compost mode. In other words, find ways to give it up. And that's not easy, composting. But sometimes when we delay and think we are going to follow through,
Yeah.
we probably need to set a time frame for by when will we do it. If not, we have to find ways not to build resentment.
And especially for situations of comments that aren't respectful or microaggressions or stereotyping comments, if they're not addressed in the moment, especially by the teacher, professor, someone in authority, then the marginalized person or group isn't going to feel like they were paid attention to. And a day goes by and it's lost, it's gone. So I find delay very tempting. I like that one because I'm not a direct confrontation person, but you're exactly right. There needs to be a timeliness and an urgency as well.
I'd like to make a comment that from what I'm observing, not just with the presentation here, but talking to other people as well, I think Goshen College is doing a lot of things right in trying to engage people with respectful conversation, even with the differences on campus, and acknowledging the fact that there are differences on campus and there's going to be respect there. Generally, in higher education, this is not happening as much as it should be. There are a number of Ivy League presidents that have had to resign under pressure. There have been things happen where student groups feel afraid on campus. Thank God for people who, out of our faith tradition and out of some very skilled understanding of social science, are really trying to build those kinds of capacities to talk together with respect and love. I'd also like to say a good follow-up book, if you want to pick up from where we have left off this morning, is J. Nelson Craybill in a book he wrote in 2023 called Stuck Together. And it is rich in its understanding of the biblical heritage that we have of believers, both in the Old Testament and New Testament, that just don't agree with each other. And so they have to work across those divisions. Divisions are always there. But his clear point is that we're still stuck together, even with the divisions. We don't split and hammer each other because of those divisions. We work with those and we're stuck together. So I commend that book if you want to. There's one in the historical library. There's one in the public library that I have. Will soon be going back. And there's one in our church library. Stuck Together, J. Nelson Craybill. And now let's express our thanks to our teacher this morning.